What is up, my Pika crew? This is ThePikaWu, and welcome to my first X and Y Wi-Fi battle. This is going to be against a guy called Vaporeon 1, and this was a really awesome match, so I hope you guys enjoy the video. Before we start the battle, let's go ahead and analyze both teams. On my side, I have a Pseudo Sandstorm team, as shown by my Tyranitar, Excadrill, and Reuniclus combination. My other Pokemon consist of Rotom H, which is a Choice Scarf set. I really needed something with fast speed and something that can keep my momentum going. I also have an Azumarill, which is a Belly Drum set with Priority Aqua Jet. And lastly, I have a Pachirisu. This is actually my first shiny I've ever caught in the wild, and luckily for me, it had max IVs in speed and its hasty nature, so I can actually use it in Wi-Fi battles. Although Pachirisu is somewhat competitively unviable, the set I utilize is able to fare decently against my opponent's team. On my opponent's side, he has a relatively defensive team, as shown by his Blissey, Forretress, Politoed, Ferrothorn, and Vaporeon. His team is really weak to fighting, and I've noticed that, but I don't really have any strong fighting moves to capitalize on this weakness. On the other hand, my team is pretty weak on the water side, so especially if that Politoed is a Scarf or offensive set, I can be in grave danger. Overall, not one opponent has a team matchup advantage, as both of us have some pretty evident weaknesses that can be exploited from each of our own benefits. Hope you guys enjoy the battle, and yeah, enjoy! So I'm going to lead off with a Rotom Heat, as my opponent's going to lead off with a Talonflame. And looking at this lead matchup, I actually have the matchup advantage because Talonflame cannot do much to me, and I can retaliate back with a Volt Switch. Plus, I can freely use the Volt Switch since he has no ground types or immunities, and this gives me early control of the match by maintaining Switch advantage and maintaining momentum. Knowing he can't do anything with Talonflame, my opponent's going to switch into Ferrothorn. In my opinion, a safer play would have been the Blissey switch, but this was a really smart play because Rotom is the only Pokemon on my team that can actually have the chance to 1-hit KO his Ferrothorn with the Overheat, and by going for the Volt Switch, I cannot bring in my Rotom again. So I do have a couple of options here for switch-ins. Two viable Pokemon are my Reuniclus and Pachirisu, but I do decide to bring in my Pachirisu because I can start taking advantage of my Swagger and Paralysis combination. This enables me to deal with Ferrothorn while at the same time minimize the quantity of entry hazards he can set up. That's because he has a 50% chance to break through Confusion and 35% chance to break through Confusion and Paralyzation when I do paralyze him. Plus, I can set up to 4 substitutes so he can't take me out in one hit. So I am going to set up a substitute on the Switch, and Forretress also has the potential to set up entry hazards, so I am going to confuse it as well. My Pachirisu now seems to pose a problem for my opponent because his options are really limited when he is statused, and luckily for me, he's actually unable to break through the Confusion, meaning my substitute will be still intact for another turn. Now, to fully complete my strategy, I'm going to use Nuzzle to paralyze my opponent as my opponent brings in the Ferrothorn, which is a really great play on my opponent's part, as this enables him to power up his Gyro Ball move and also deal heavy damage with his Iron Barbs and Rocky Helmet combination. So this means I have to play relatively carefully because if I go for the Nuzzle or Super Fang on the Ferrothorn, I am going to receive massive recoil damage. In order to overcome this problem, I will have to play mind games and play them successfully. I'm going to go ahead and just Swagger the Ferrothorn so he deals greater damage onto himself upon Confusion, and it really is my only non-contact move I can use anyways, but he brings in the Blissey instead. This is really important because it actually reveals the psychology of my opponent. When facing Confusion, my opponent likes to play relatively conservative and safe. He has the preference of switching out instead of staying in and playing with the chance. Essentially, this means once I confuse the Ferrothorn again, I can go for a contact move like Super Fang or Nuzzle, knowing that he is most likely going to switch out. My strategy works out successfully as I am able to hit the Blissey with the Super Fang, and this means that I'm basically one step ahead of him because I have a lot of opportunities to go for, and I have a lot of options. I can stay in and continuously go for the Swagger combination, but the thing is, it's kind of redundant and ineffective at this point, because I really don't have entry hazards, so I am actually going to get a free switch into Tyranitar, knowing that he is forced to go for the Soft Boil to heal up, and I can set up the Stealth Rocks. And having Stealth Rocks is really necessary because it has a lot of consequences. It reveals the opponent's movesets, it reveals the opponent's speed, and it does a lot of damage against some of his Pokemon, namely that Talonflame. So despite all these correct plays that I made, the overall consequence of these moves are basically two things that happen. One, I'm able to set up Stealth Rocks without getting damage on my Tyranitar, and two, I minimize the amount of entry hazards my opponent's actually going to be able to set up. So now he's actually going to bring in the Politoed, and this is a really great switch in because it changes the weather into his favor, and he will be able to scare me out with a water type move. But the ability for me to turn into Mega Tyranitar actually enables me to reconvert the weather into Sandstorm, giving me the special defense boost. However, I'm still not really comfortable staying in against this Politoed because he can be a choice set, like a choice Scarf or choice Spec set, and like I said in the team preview, I'm really scared of that. So I am going to switch out with my Tyranitar because I don't really have that many options. I have a glaring water weakness on my team, which means my switch out will unfortunately have to be predictable as Azumarill is my only water resist. And my opponent's going to exploit the fact that I'm going to bring in Azumarill, and he's going to bring in the Ferrothorn to deal with my Azumarill. And this is a really great play because it fares well against both my Azumarill and my Tyranitar if I do decide to stay in. I can't really touch this Ferrothorn with my Belly Drum boost, and I really don't want to take a Power Whip, so I'm going to bring in my Excadrill to take the hit. I had a couple options there, but I did refrain from bringing in Reuniclus, simply because he has a Blissey still lurking around, and I only have 5 PPs for my Focus Blast, so I want to conserve those Focus Blasts. My Excadrill is max attack, and basically my Stab Earthquake will hurt really badly, even if this Ferrothorn is physically defensive, so I do have to play a little bit of mind games here, whether to choose the Earthquake or the Rapid Spin. I do decide to go for Earthquake because he probably thinks I'm going to choose the Rapid Spin to get rid of the hazards and the Leech Seed, so I want to make sure I Earthquake and then Rapid Spin at an optimal moment, since contact moves like Rapid Spin will hurt badly due to Ferrothorn's ability and item. Now I finally decide to go for the Rapid Spin here, and I didn't really anticipate the Talonflame switch in, but this ends up working great because the spin allows me to bring the Talonflame under half with the hit, meaning he will faint upon next switch in, plus I get rid of the Leech Seed and the Stealth Rocks. Talonflame, although a huge threat in standard matches with the Gale Wing ability, doesn't really pose a threat to my team because of my Mega Tyranitar that resists both of his stab moves. I do decide to stay in with the Excadrill, a really risky play, but it ends up working really well since he does reveal the U-turn, which would have done a ton of damage against my Talonflame counter, my Tyranitar. So my Rock Slide ends up hitting this opponent's Politoed instead of the Talonflame, but it does do a decent amount of damage, which has me questioning what kind of set this Politoed is. I might be just underestimating Excadrill's physical attack, but the damage on Rock Slide made me believe that this Politoed is rather offensive, which is reaffirmed by the fact that his item isn't leftovers, so I don't want this Politoed outspeeding me and taking me out, so I do decide to choose a Pokemon to fodder off. I end up choosing my Azumarill. This is because he still has this Vaporeon in play and other Pokemon that can deal with me even after I set up Belly Drum, which is his Ferrothorn, but his Scald ends up doing like no damage, and it seems that he isn't offensive at all, rather a defensive set, so this actually shifts the battle into my favor again, so I can set up the Belly Drum without really worrying about much. Plus, even if he does end up getting the Scald Burn, my Azumarill still has the pure power, or the huge power ability, which doubles my attack anyways, which basically nullifies any sort of burn. Now that I set up, I can start wreaking havoc with the Rain Boosted Priority Aqua Jet, which should be able to take out the Politoed at this HP level, but my opponent decides to actually switch out and sack his Ferrothorn instead, which is somehow able to live. Not really sure how, but he is going to be able to live with this litter health and take me out with the Iron Barbs and Rocky Helmet ability, but it's not too much of a big deal because I was initially planning on sacking my Azumarill anyways, and I can basically pick off the Ferrothorn with my Rotom Heat by just going for the Volt Switch, which does bypass his ability and his Rocky Helmet since it isn't a contact move, surprisingly. So I am just going to bring in my Pachirisu, mostly because I can outspeed pretty much everything on his team. The only Pokemon that outspeeds it is the Talonflame, but he actually surprises me with a Choice Scarf Vaporeon. It ends up missing, which gives me an opportunity to set up with Pachirisu again. So it ends up being a kind of battle of the shiny purple Pokemon, but unfortunately for me, he is going to take me out with the Hydro Pump. He does miss the first time, he does hit the second time, and unfortunately, Pachirisu is going to get taken out. So I don't have too many options to take a Rain Boosted Hydro Pump. My Reuniclus will get two-shotted, and my Rotom Heat's Volt Switch cannot take out the Vaporeon in one hit since he is near max HP and Vaporeon does have a decent amount of natural bulk. And that means I'd have to sack a Pokemon if I went for the Volt Switch, so the only other option I have is my Tyranitar, so I do get rid of the rain, and it does give me a special defense boost, so I should be able to live one Hydro Pump and go for the crunch, just to deal as much damage as possible to the Vaporeon. But he ends up bringing the Fortress, which surprisingly gets two-shotted, which is absolutely ridiculous. The Fortress must have been invested more on the special defensive side than on the physical side, so this helps out a lot, meaning that the Fortress isn't too big of a threat and it just gets taken out really easily. So afterwards, he is going to bring in the Politoed, which isn't too big of a threat, but it does scare out my Tyranitar because of the rain and the Scald. So I am limited to what I can switch into. The only other Pokemon that can take a Scald is my Reuniclus, which takes it pretty well, so I do have the potential to set up with Calm Mind. I'm pretty sure this Politoed does have the Parasong though, because he did reveal the Protect earlier, and usually those Politoeds with Protect have Parasong as well, just as a combination. So he does end up sacking his Talonflame there, not really sure why. I would have saved the Talonflame later because I am just going to set up the Calm Mind, and he basically just gave me a free setup, so I'm pretty sure this Politoed does have Parasong though, so that is going to put a lot of pressure on my Reuniclus in the future, because that's going to limit how many turns I have in the future, and he is going to be able to effectively stall me out with the Blissey if he does have the Parasong. So he does bring in the Politoed again, he does reveal the Parasong, and that is too bad. I won't be able to sweep with my Reuniclus, so I am limited to 3 turns. I do end up taking down this Politoed though, and that is really beneficial for me because he does have the rain up, and with the Politoed down I basically win the weather war, and his Vaporeon will not have any rain boosted Hydro Pumps, so I should be able to live those hits with both my Tyranitar and my Reuniclus. So he is going to bring in the Blissey here, and I have a couple more turns before I have to switch out, so I believe one more turn. So I am just going to go for the Focus Blast just to gauge how much damage it does, and surprisingly it does a lot of damage. So this Blissey, I am going to gauge that he's more invested in physical defense than special defense, and that's really good information to know. So because of that, I should be able to deal with this Blissey with basically my Reuniclus and also my Tyranitar as well, because Tyranitar is a physical brute, and even if he is invested in a physical defense, I should be doing a lot of damage. And looking at his team, he really doesn't have that much to deal with my Tyranitar. My Tyranitar's Crunch and with the Sandstorm should be able to take down this Blissey eventually. And because his Vaporeon is his last, I do have my Scarf Rotom, plus my Tyranitar has a lot of natural bulk, so I can live the Hydro Pump and deal a lot of damage, if not take it out with a Crunch. So that ends up being the match. The latter half of the match, like going forward, is just him trying to stall me out, but I am able to take down both his Blissey and his Vaporeon with my Tyranitar. So I hope you guys enjoyed the battle. This is my first X and Y battle, so be sure to give a thumbs up. Let's see how many likes we can get on this video. So yeah, if you really enjoyed, be sure to leave a comment, a favorite, and share the video. So shout out to Vaporeon1 for trading me the Tyranitar, Excadrill, Reuniclus, and Azumarill. And shout out to LeBron Dwayne63 for trading me the Rotom Heat. So stay tuned for the question of the day, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.